Northern Heritage Engineering of Darlington is currently involved with two new-built steam locomotive projects, the Festiniog Railway's Mountaineer and the South Eastern Railway's Crampton No. 81. The Crampton project is at a very early stage. This can be seen by these boiler and firebox components currently stored outside the workshops. Mountaineer, as will be seen, is at a far more advanced stage of construction. Here are the steel sheets for the Crampton's firebox wrapper, inner firebox crown and sides, and in the background the union ring that will join the boiler barrel to the throat plate. Here can be seen the splayed out lower sides of the inner and outer firebox. These were used to gain a lower centre of gravity by Crampton in accordance with thinking of the time. This is the union ring in close-up. It is chamfered for welding at both ends. The throat plate is thicker than the barrel. These are the steel sheets for the inner firebox front and rear and the firebox throat plate for the Crampton locomotive. They have splayed lower ends to fit the firebox sides.
This is the Crampton's rolled steel boiler barrel seen from the leading end. The tack welds are clearly visible here and there is no chamfering as the front tube plate is mounted internally.
This is the Crampton's boiler barrel seen from the trailing end. The chamfer indicates where it will be welded to the union ring.
The Crampton's dome is of welded steel like the boiler barrel. Here can be seen the joint to the barrel. The top of the dome is chamfered to take the upper flange when it is welded in place.
This area contains miscellaneous Crampton components, such as the fire hole dooring and the upper and lower dome flanges. The workshop is not only engaged in railway contracts, and here can be seen welding work on the back head of a 3/4 scale folding loading line boiler. boiler work is a particular strength of the Northern Heritage team. The experience gained so far is expected to prove particularly useful when the time comes to complete the Crampton's boiler. The Crampton project will mark a major departure from the railway policy of the company's predecessor, which was mainly centred on narrow gauge products. Work on the new build Mountaineer in 1863 form is well underway, as is evident here. This is the locomotive's right-hand mainframe and trailing wheel set. The distinctive shape of the motion bracket can also be seen to advantage here.
Mountaineer's cylinders have been cast from modern Festiniog railway patterns and have had to be altered to suit the profiles of the early George England locomotives. This can be seen from the wasting in of the upper parts of the end flanges. This is the left-hand rear cylinder cover flanged for double side bars, but yet to be machined. Three machined eccentrics for Mountaineer are seen here, resting on a cylinder casting. Looking rearwards between the main frames can be seen the way shaft and the peculiar bell cranks associated with the Allen straight link motion.
This is the rear left-hand spring area, showing the extensive use of bronze rubbing surfaces. These have been specially designed for the new build locomotive and were not present on the original.
These brackets anchor the rear of the main frames to the firebox throat plate. This is the left-hand valve gland. The common steam chest is formed by bolting together the two cylinder castings and sealing them up. The steam chest flange for the main steam pipe is located on the left-hand cylinder casting. Here are some components for the Allen straight link valve gear. The valve rod, seen on the left, has to be cranked to clear the leading axle. This is Mountaineer's rear right-hand wheel. It is cut out from single sheet of steel and there is no separate tyre. The pin and collar fastening for the crank pin, later used by Arthur Hayward, can also be seen.
The comparatively flimsy nature of the early mainframe design can be seen clearly here. The boiler was regarded very much as a structural unit, the mainframes were not continuous throughout the locomotive's length, and attractive loading was taken through the firebox. Here are the reach rod bell crank, the left-hand motion bracket and the left-hand cylinder casting. No cylinder covers have yet been fitted on this side.
This is Mountaineer's leading wheel set. The axle boxes with redesigned oilways are an improvement on 1863.
This is Mountaineer's classic riveted D-shaped smoke box. The fixed part of the hinge has also been fitted. The new build Mountaineer's boiler is of the all-welded steel type. Sadly, much of it was obscured by clutter during our visit. The original shape of Mountaineer's smokebox door is a matter for conjecture, as early photographs are indistinct. The new build will have a door that matches the smokebox shape. The moving part of the hinge was fitted before this film was made. What particularly fascinated you about the history of the George England locomotives of the Festiniog Railway?
Long pause. Because it was the missing link. Everybody assumed that the little tank engines were running around were the original format. It was only when I came across an image of the original square tanked versions, which I thought, well, that's very good. I was looking for a project, and that just fitted most of the criteria.
Why were you particularly interested in creating Mountaineer?
I was looking for a project to do, something that was worthwhile and had a significance, rather than just building another little 2-foot engine for pleasure or for running around at somebody's place. I thought that if we built Mountaineer, it would have a significance, and a purpose to it.
Would you have considered creating Little Giant in something like approximating to its original form?
Little Giant next. That's the next project.
Next project. Ah, yes, wonderful. Why did you choose Mark Ashton as the engineer for this project?
Why did you choose Mark Ashton? I've known Mark and his father an awful long time, and they've always turned out good product. I've had 1, 2, 3 of his units, I think, over the years, and they've always been of good quality. They work hard, and the product does the job really. They make good engines.
You formed Mountaineer 1863 Locomotive Ltd with Major Brian Smith. When did you form the company?
Sorry, May 2015, I think.
You say that your mission is to establish Mountaineer's rightful place in history. What would that be, in your opinion?
Well, as a rightful place, depending on how you look at it, some people see it as a failure, as it was light-footed, but as a prototype for the role in which it was created for, it was a great success. They used it as a test bed. As you may or may not know, originally it was produced. It was very light-footed and primed desperately. So the Spooner and his friends put a steam dome onto it on the main boiler, and then slowly discovered what its limitations were, and modified it accordingly, particularly in traction. Whereas, say, initially it was designed to pull 25 empty slate wagons back up the hill, they discovered if you sat 5 fat Welshmen on the engine, it will pull 50. So, needless to say, the practical modification to that was that they removed the water tanks, put big slugs of probably cast iron underneath the tanks, which added the mass to give it the increased traction, which all the later engines had the mass increased by different methods. So yes, so in that case it was a success, but on day one it was a failure. Does that make sense?
Yes. How cooperative were Mr. Lewin and Mr. Wally of the Festiniog Railway in providing help for the project?
Well, initially I made contact with Paul and John. I asked them if I could come down and talk to them about the project, and I took a friend with me who's no longer with us, and we had a 4-hour like an interview with them to discuss whether we had the potential to do it. They were very, very helpful. I mean, I couldn't have done it without them. I would like some financial support, that would have been nice, but none of that's been coming. But they've helped with the patterns, with advice. John's been helpful on the advice, and say to get access to Paul. I mean, he's the general manager of an enormous company, and to talk with some silly old guy who wants to build a replica loco, I appreciate that. If he took the time out to talk to me.
How difficult has it been to ensure that the project components stay within the original design parameters?
I can't say it's been easy. Yes, it's not been easy because people have mentioned it was a very fact that we were building the boiler with a dome. The fact is we're using, dare I say, metric nuts and bolts, things like that. So how pure do you want to be on it? We're using steel wheels, well, rather than cast iron wheels with tyres on. There are variations, but the result is the same. We will have something which will behave the same as the original engine did. Well, I think so anyway. Other details, well, we're all welded boiler, and this boiler should be an awful lot stronger than the rather weak wrought iron boilers that the originals had, being tugged in both directions by the train and the tender, you know, because you know the boiler's a structural member of the arrangement. So in that case it'll be better. Right.
You say that you have received support from Festiniog and narrow gauge enthusiasts from all over Europe. Has there been a great deal of support from the continent, and has there been any from further afield?
Well, I'll say a little from the continent. There's one chap in Switzerland, and I forget where the other chap is, but a couple from the States who are far more enthusiastic and do have handwritten letters from them. Company was launched April 20. We launched the project at the November show at NEC Birmingham, where one of the members of York Model Engineers had made us a wooden replica of Mountaineer. Quite recently, very well done, and we got a lot of interest at the Wally show. It was fortunate that there were lots of the younger end of the scale. There were young drivers there, trainee drivers, and they were all very revved up to see it. They were very enthused to see that they'd be driving it in, say, 10 years. They were thinking about 10 years. So, and we took a list. I think I took a list of 100 names at that point, of which certainly 50% of them became subscribers.
How do you envisage the future ownership structure of Mountaineer once the locomotive has entered service?
I've had all sorts of different ideas about that. I own a fair percentage. My financial input has been quite high. I've got another member who doesn't want to be named, has put a healthy amount of money into it in the form of shares. So we've got, I think, 5 shareholders who in theory own the engine, and we're all in agreement that we want the engine to be used rather than stuffed in a museum piece. Depending on what amount of use we can get promised to us, the FR would be the natural home for it. Whether we get enough use there, that's a different question. I would like to see her out there running, so there are other places where it could go and live. But as for the long-term plan, I would imagine that we'll probably make the whole thing into a trust and donate it to one of the long-term groups. I'm too old to think about managing it. The other two are quite old, so I'll be kicking the bucket. And so he wants to, in order to live on, there wants to be a management structure for it. And the only possible way is to donate it to one of the other static railways. I don't mean static railways, you know what I mean? Established railways.
Right, your company's motto is from the past into the future. Do you intend the Mountaineer project to conclude with the locomotive's commissioning, or would you consider recreating other lost historic narrow gauge designs, such as the 18-inch gauge Manning Water small chassis class, or the 2-foot gauge North Wales Narrow Gauge Railway Bethgelert.
Okay, the company will continue to exist because we're actually a manufacturing company. So the plan was to create a company which could manufacture locomotives, which we will have done, and then the next thing within that company is to earn money, is for the loco to earn money to support itself. So I say driver training, hire, films, TVs, weddings, you know, from a base, and we could actually, if somebody wants to commission another variation on it, I mean the variation from what the level we're at with an early domed version. There's the in-between stages would be a princess or a prince with the cast iron weight, the U-shaped weight, pre-saddle tank, with again no screen on. There are many stages in the development before we get to what we have currently, the full tortoiseshell, full saddle tank with full cab, elevated cab. There are several stages between that and what we're at now. And we could certainly experiment with Mountaineer. We could turn it into Princess of 1880, let's say. I'm not sure if that's the right date, but again, with the half tank on it, which I'm sure some of the enthusiasts would be keen to see. And it wouldn't cost a lot of money to do. But the Mountaineer company itself has to create income. So we could either sell a locomotive, which is not impossible, or we could make another engine for somebody else. We could make it a lot faster than we did. We've learnt a lot, and we've got patents galore now. So yeah, the future could be good.
Now, Northern Heritage Engineering is a relatively recent company which has been really carved from the ashes of a predecessor. Would you like to tell me a little bit more about this history?
Yeah, MBR Engineering Services was the company that Northern Heritage came out of. Basically, MBR was let down on a number of fairly large contracts. Basically got into financial problems over that. Myself and Dave Wood decided it was a good idea to keep the thing running. So that's what we did. We effectively purchased the assets off the liquidator and set Northern Heritage Engineering away in June of 2024.
Once you had been approached by David with his initial proposal, what were your first thoughts on the engineering challenges presented by a new build at Mountaineer?
I consider Mountaineer was a relatively simple locomotive. It was narrow gauge, which obviously fit our main criteria for manufacturing. It's got an interesting valve gear in Allen, which I haven't been involved with before, and neither has Dave, our engineer. So the main challenges were in getting our head around Allen valve gear and putting that into the valve gear programs and so forth. But beyond that, I didn't see too many issues with building Mountaineer. It's a relatively early, relatively basic locomotive.
Given that original research for the early Festiniog locomotives is incomplete, how has this affected progress on the project?
We've had to wait over a couple of times while Dave has approached the Festiniog. We've had various patterns going backwards and forwards and sort of brain. Yeah, we've had to make some patterns. There isn't a lot of authentic original design. There's photographs, and there's sort of some old bits of the original loco that we've effectively copied. So we're about as close as I think we can be with the information that is available.
What compromises from the original design, as known, have been necessary in order for the new build to comply with modern requirements?
Oh, obviously the materials are completely different. We're using steel where there would have been wrought. We're using steel wheels that have been machined from solid effectively. So they're a monoblock wheel in a modern material. The axles, modern material. Basically, modern financial constraints have got to be taken into account. Where you can't see things, we use metric fastenings because obviously they're enormously cheaper and easier to get hold of. Where we need the thing to look as it should, we're using authentic looking fastenings, fixtures, etc.
We increased the bracing inside the springs, didn't we? You know, where the springs.
Yeah, we've put slide plates in bronze under the spring areas to make those work a little bit better. Just tried to generally use sort of 21st century manufacturing methods to make the thing actually work physically better for its design parameters.
Well, yes.
So we're using probably more sliding surfaces, bronze and so forth. The axle boxes are probably, I would imagine, a lot more advanced than they were in the day. Oiling, a lot more advanced than it was originally. The boiler, obviously,
it was a lot stronger.
Is a lot stronger and conforms to modern specifications, design criteria.
Single piece foundation ring.
Yeah.
Was the project in any way delayed by the COVID-19 pandemic?
Everything was delayed by the COVID-19 pandemic. And obviously it was. The factory was shut for, well, between 2 and 3 months because we took the conscious decision to go with the Prime Minister's instruction. When we did finally come back, obviously there was start-up time and everything else. So yes, it was delayed by COVID.
Do you have any revised schedule for the completion of the Mountaineer project?
The engine is in fact timed. The motion has been lifted clear to paint. I'm waiting for outside motion components to finish it, but I'm sort of hoping that in the first quarter of 2025 we should have it air running. It then boils down to the cash flow, I guess, of Dave and his consortium.
We now come on to the Crampton Locomotive Trust and its associated project for a South Eastern Railway Crampton 420 locomotive. What made you interested in collaborating with this trust?
This isn't so much a collaboration. We were approached by the guy who is running the Crampton Trust and asked if we would be interested in building the Crampton locomotive, to which we said yes.
What particular engineering challenges do you anticipate with this project when compared with your steam locomotive work?
7-foot diameter back wheels is the main one at this moment in time. It's got a relatively complicated boiler in that it was his Crampton's mass centralisation sort of idea, which means that the firebox is tucked round axles and under things and round things, so it's a relatively complicated boiler. Relatively odd valve gear. Everything about it, in fact, is relatively odd because, it's an old prototype, so it's early days of engineering. I think it's all achievable, and I think it'll be a really different, nice thing when it's done. I personally am interested in all the locomotives. The sort of pre-1860 locomotives interest me the most personally.
Foundation.
Yeah.
I note that this is proposed that 3 suitable South Eastern railway carriages of the period will be replicated to accompany the locomotive. Once again, with the usual caveats, have you any idea of the cost, A, of the locomotive and B, of the carriages?
The carriages, I've seen drawings of the carriages. The plans around what is going to be done with carriages I haven't discussed with anybody. As far as the cost of the locomotive goes, I think the head of the Crampton Trust, Mike P, should be spoken to about that, because it's not really for me as the manufacturer to come up with that type of detail.
Will the carriages necessarily follow after the locomotive, or will work on the two entities be concurrent?
I have absolutely no idea.
When is it envisaged to run a completed train in service?
Again, I have absolutely no idea.
Yeah. Funding.
Yeah. They're questions from IPs basically. You need to interview Mike Pease and ask him what his plans are. I don't. He's got the finance for the boiler in full. He's commissioned the boiler in full.
Organised.
We're building the boiler. His website goes live imminently. Beyond that, I don't really know. We haven't priced for any further production of anything. I've started looking at wheel sets here and there on the 7-foot drivers. I've started looking at wheel sets for tenders and for effectively the bogie. I know it's not a bogie, but I'll call them the bogie wheels. But we haven't been commissioned to produce those yet.
We have the boiler materials in.
Yeah, he's taking a photograph of all the boiler equipment. So the boiler, I mean, we're looking to answer your question, Mark, with the boiler. I would say probably 3 months down the line, 12 to 13 weeks, the boiler should be getting somewhere near. Welding starts next week. Preparation work has already been done, as you've seen. So I'm hoping that the boiler by late spring will be probably coming to somewhere near.
Thank you very much for your time.
Doesn't hurt anybody.